Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Zinghausen here with you. It's already November 30th today, and there are a lot of interesting news stories. So, in this episode, the GUR blows up Kadyrov's men, the illegal Akhmat business is sabotaged near Berdyansk. It looks like Orban has gone too far. Poland cancels the meeting. And in the European Union, they are preparing a response to Orban's trips to Putin. Is it a stab in the back, or is he actually defending interests? Meanwhile, Kazakhstan is protesting against Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory, while at the same time Putin is simply dreaming about the lands of northern Kazakhstan. And then there's Trump's ultimatum. The US is actually ready to use force against Venezuela. They're closing the skies. And where is Maduro running to? And also about how Putin's friends, Timchenko, the Rotenbergs, and others are secretly selling Russia's resources to Americans. And about the balloon attack too. Lukashenko surprised everyone here. He paralyzed the airport of a neighboring country, completely lost it. We'll talk about that as well. So, all this and more. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. And subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Well, let's start with this news. The GUR eliminated Kadyrovites and their illegal business near Berdyansk. Fighters from the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense found Kadyrovites under temporarily occupied Berdyansk in the Zaporizhzhia region, who had set up an illegal business there selling stolen fuel. And on November 29th, 2 explosions went off at the site where the Kadyrovites were selling this fuel. So Ukrainian partisans found out that the Kadyrovites were draining and selling fuel at the same spot on the highway near Berdyansk and decided to take advantage of this. Let's take a look at how it happened. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they were also selling fuel from the Ministry of Defense there. So what happened? The partisans discovered that the Kadyrovites were draining and selling fuel there, and that pickups belonging to various other thugs would come by. So they planted an explosive device at the spot, actually 2 of them. When the whole group gathered there, the first explosion went off. Some managed to escape, others didn't. But after a while, not knowing what had happened there, another pickup with thugs showed up. And there was another explosion there as well. So in the end, it turned out to be a double strike. 2 vehicles used by these looters from the Akhmat unit were hit. That's what happens when you come to someone else's land. And the GUR warns that not everyone will be able to get away, because not everyone will still have their legs by then. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser for night drones, Mavics and Avengers for the 32nd Steel Separate Mechanized Brigade, which is fighting in the Pokrovsky direction. And here is a message from the commander of the battery of the 32nd Steel Mechanized Brigade. Let's watch it.
Бажаємо здоров'я! Я командир батареї американських систем М109 Паладин 32-ї окремої механізованої сталевої бригади, яка зараз знаходиться на Покровському напрямку. Ми разом із глядачами каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на комплекси Mavic 3T та Mavic 3 Pro та антени з репітерами до них. Ми дуже дякуємо глядачам каналу, які допомагають нам та не забувають, що війна триває. Дякуємо вам. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Here's the commander of the 32nd Artillery Brigade, friends. By the way, yesterday we finished the fundraiser for the 26th Artillery Brigade and for Dasha. I wrote to her this morning and I could literally feel her joy through the phone screen. She was like, oh, hooray. So, a huge thank you to all of you. Let's close the fundraiser for the 32nd as well. There's not much left. And believe me, for our artillerymen, your donations mean guaranteed destruction of the enemy and their equipment. You see what kind of steel-nerved artillerymen we have. Let's help them out. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There's Mono, Private, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And also, if for some reason you don't see the payment details here, there's a QR code. It also leads to the fundraiser. And friends, our artillerymen are just dead on accurate. So let's help them out. And as always, from the truly bright, incredibly steely, and remarkably strong people, our genuine heroes, our admirable heroines, we then move on to, well, how exactly should I carefully put this in case there are innocent children watching, let's just simply say the rather brown ruler? Hungary is a sovereign state and will not ask permission from EU countries for Orban's trips to Moscow, said Hungarian Foreign Minister Szijjártó. Earlier, German Chancellor Merz simply stated that Orban went to Russia without the approval of the European Union. That's understandable. Without any mandate. That's also clear. You know what's interesting? When it comes to unfreezing European funds, then Orban, the European Union. Let me remind you, for every euro Hungary gives to the EU budget, it takes out 2 euros. And another 18 billion euros are frozen because Orban has issues with the transparency of the judicial system and pressure on the media. So he's definitely not the main guardian of European values in the European Union. Orban remembers sovereignty. We are sovereign, I'll decide for myself where to go whenever he needs to do something that goes against EU policy. Like buying Russian gas, buying Russian oil, and he quickly forgets about it when it's time to receive money from the fund. See how that works. Well, since he's talking about Hungary being a sovereign state, maybe the European Union and NATO should make it as sovereign from them as possible. Why not, after all? Orban builds his entire policy on opposing Brussels. For him, Brussels is always to blame for everything. If you don't like the European Union, if you don't like its rules, if you think Putin is right and NATO shouldn't expand. By the way, Orban supported Putin's claim that NATO is indeed a threat to him. Then leave the European Union, leave NATO. By the way, Putin, whose Botox behind is so adored by lovers of Russian oil, especially this one, has a wonderful alternative for you. There's the customs union, there's the CSTO. It's like NATO for the privileged and the poor. Go ahead. You know who Orban reminds me of? He reminds me of those Russian Z-patriots who, while sitting pretty and feeding at the trough, shout that Russia is always right, that the West is decaying, and that it's all about non-traditional values and so on and so forth. But then they rush off to Europe for Christmas. They buy real estate there, and their kids study there too. That's exactly what Orban reminds me of. By the way, Orban has elections coming up in the spring, and apparently he went to Putin to get some advice on how not to lose spectacularly in those elections. Russia has been recognized as an existential threat in Europe, yet Orban keeps running to Putin to pay his respects. It's so disgusting to watch. It reminds me, I guess everyone has had someone like this in their life, someone who's just, excuse my French, such a piece of crap. Well, what can you do? He knows himself that he's repulsive. He knows he's as vile, unprincipled, and corrupt as it gets. Is there anything the European Union can actually do about him or not? Well, good for the president of Poland. Mr. Nawrocki refused to meet with Orban after his visit to Putin. He was supposed to start his visit to Hungary to take part in the Visegrad Group summit. He refused, saying, "I'm not going to meet with someone who went to shake hands with Putin." I think freezing European funds would be a perfect gift for Orban ahead of the elections. If you don't share the European agenda, sabotage everyone in the European Union, block sanctions, block aid to Ukraine. It's an almost unanimous decision by everyone else. Fico is still peeking out from around the corner, but he's already starting to realize that his turn is coming soon. You go against everyone. In the European Union, you don't consider Putin an aggressor? Well, let's see how you manage on your own, sovereignly, without the European Union. Oh no, he doesn't want that. You see? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here, we're not only fighting against Russian propaganda, but also exposing Russian lies, which, let me remind you, the Kremlin spends hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on. And we also call out those who love to kiss up to Putin in his rubber jewelry box. So make sure to subscribe. And look, here's some news we've got for you. I've gathered them all together for you today. Kazakhstan is protesting to Ukraine over the attack on the infrastructure of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. Let me remind you, just the other day, drones struck the port of Novorossiysk, And that was it. The consortium's terminals aren't shipping any oil. The official, or rather Russian terminals used by the consortium aren't shipping any oil. Russia is also a member of this consortium. The official representative of Kazakhstan's foreign ministry, Aybex Madyrov, stated that Astana views the attack as an action damaging the relationship between Kazakhstan and Ukraine. By that logic, we, or rather Ukraine, have no right to attack Russian ports. We can't, because foreign ships are being loaded there with sanctioned oil. See how it turns out? And we're not allowed to attack pipelines either, because oil flows through them that is then sold to us, to India, for example, to China, to African countries. Let's start with the basics. There is a war going on in Ukraine. The Russian Federation attacked us. They are shelling Ukrainian cities with missiles, drones, with everything they can use to attack. People are dying, children are dying, entire cities are being wiped off the face of the earth. And now here we are. Suddenly we're supposed to worry that it's not just Russian oil there, but also Kazakh oil. Oh dear. Any reduction in Russia's military budget directly affects how and for how long Russia will continue this war. If you're trading with Russia, making good money there, helping Russia bypass sanctions, there's that little detail, right? After all. So what questions could there possibly be? If you want to trade with Russia, accept all the risks of war. Accept the risk that at any moment the pipeline located on Russian territory could simply be blown to pieces. And the ports and the terminals, Ukrainian drones and missiles will blow them all up. And look, Kazakhstan is expressing a protest. Well, don't you want to protest against this war? To protest against Russia? Russia, we protest against you because you are killing Ukrainians. Don't you want to express that kind of protest? Or a protest just so that missiles don't hit residential buildings? Just like the previous night when a dozen residential buildings in Kiev were hit by drones and missiles. Don't you want to protest? I have always said and will continue to say that I do not equate the views of Kazakhs with those of the leadership of Kazakhstan. For me, these are completely different things. I have a lot of friends from Ukraine among my followers, and people from Kazakhstan always write words of support. Taking this opportunity, friends, I want to send a big hello to Kazakhstan and express my gratitude for this support. But as for the leadership, well, what's going on there? It's clear that right now everyone who is helping Russia bypass sanctions is just feeling on top of the world. And turning a blind eye to the fact that there is a war going on, justifying the aggressor, and being overly concerned about economic relations with Russia is a direct path to Russia possibly deciding that the next target of their so-called special military operation could be Kazakhstan. Especially since they have repeatedly said that the north of Kazakhstan is in fact originally Russian land. Putin himself has said this. Let me remind you, journalists discovered a diplomatic dispatch in the archives, a kind of official memo. It was written back on January 14, 1994. The author was Eberhard von Puttkammer, who at that time was the German consul general in St. Petersburg. So this memo is about Putin. At that time, he was still deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. I carried suitcases after him, and in this document, the consul recounts his conversation with Putin. According to the report of this German diplomat, Putin already stated the following in 1994. Crimea, eastern Ukraine and northern Kazakhstan are not abroad. These are lands that historically have always belonged to Russia. And Putin added that these territories were lost as a result of the collapse of the USSR. But in his opinion, it is impossible to explain to any Russian person why they should now be foreign countries. Just like that, 1994. So this whole story, when Putin played the liberal, when he was brought to power, all of it was a complete bluff. He was an imperialist to the core. A clerk, a KGB rat, a bag carrier. Now people carry bags for him too, but with different contents. So even 30 years ago, these were his views. That is Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. He annexed Crimea for a short time. As for eastern Ukraine, he says, give me Donbass. Who's next? Take a wild guess. And by the way, in her recent memoirs published at the end of 2024, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel confirmed that in private conversations, and I quote, Putin always made it clear that he does not consider the borders of the post-Soviet republics to be real, and he sees the collapse of the USSR not as a settled fact, but as a temporary defeat that needs to be corrected. Or to correct it. He'll fix your bald head, I think, soon. That would be very good. The US is ready to consider the use of force against Venezuela if Nicolas Maduro does not step down voluntarily. This has been reported repeatedly. But friends, for the sake of this news, I dug around on local platforms, read what people are saying, translated some things. In general, there's an interesting situation developing inside Venezuela right now. I'll tell you about it, give you an intro. First, here are the headlines. Trump delivered this ultimatum that if Maduro does not step down, the US is ready to consider the use of force directly to Maduro in a recent phone conversation. And Trump warned that if Maduro refuses to leave, Washington will consider other options, including the use of force. I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal here. In the event of a direct US attack, the Venezuelan authorities are considering two options for self-defense. That's what they've come up with for themselves. I recently came across a video showing some kind of unclear military branches, Venezuelan generals, colonels, some in all sorts of outfits, some in sombreros, khaki colors, some in body armor, all loaded up with gear, standing over a map of some beach and using pointers to... They were showing how they would repel an attack on the beach. I assure you, it will all be completely different. There won't be any beach landing at all. So, there are two scenarios. The first scenario is that the military is ordered to disperse now to various shelters around the country and wage a guerrilla war if an invasion suddenly occurs. And the second option is anarchization, that is the use of intelligence services and armed supporters of the ruling party to create chaos in Caracas. They want to turn Caracas, to turn Venezuela into an ungovernable space so that no one knows what, where, who, or where to run. But the US might bet on the desertion of Venezuelan soldiers. Venezuelan soldiers receive about $100 a month. That's not much. That's very little. In other words, it's not enough for an average family to cover their basic needs. That's why they expect that soldiers might desert. That is, the top military leadership, the generals, might not be able to go anywhere because they are very closely tied to Maduro, including with the cartel of the sun. But as they say, the infantry will scatter. Let me just remind you, soldiers are getting just $100. Just a reminder, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And yet Maduro has managed to drive the country into extreme poverty. No one will fight for him except his inner circle. And I think the speed at which Maduro's regime will fall will be even faster than the fall of Assad's regime in Syria. And here's what I've dug up on local platforms, on some forums, everything available from open sources. So the support from the generals is 100%, but it's practically forced. In other words, Maduro bought the loyalty of the generals. They have been given control over the oil industry and food distribution. Gold mining as well. The generals are doing just fine there. Many high-ranking Venezuelan officers are under US sanctions, or they are wanted for trafficking illegal substances. For the cartel of the Suns, the fall of Maduro would simply mean prison in the US. And that's it. Where can they run? To Cuba. That's why, of course, they will fight. But tell me, where are the generals and where is the actual fighting? It's the mid-level and junior military ranks. Loyalty is low there, but fear is high. Ordinary soldiers, as I already mentioned, live in poverty just like the people. Their salaries are tiny. But why is a military mutiny in Venezuela so difficult? A system of intelligence has been implemented in the Venezuelan army. I can't recall the abbreviation right now. This intelligence service was created by Cuban advisors. In other words, Cuban advisors are helping. What's the essence of it? Any discontent within the army is punished by torture. The soldiers are afraid of the enemy and afraid of their bunkmate who could be an informant. So that's the kind of motivation they have there. As for the local population, Maduro has minimal support there. There have been various polls, but it's about 15 to 20%. These are either diehards, like our old communist grandmas, and grandpas too, by the way. So they have these hardcore ideological Chavista fanatics. or people who are completely dependent on government food rations. So that's a separate caste there as well. Or members of armed gangs who are on Maduro's payroll. As for the opposition, the overwhelming majority have fled because they're being physically eliminated. 8 million people have left the country altogether. And as for uprisings, people still did rise up in 2014, in 2017, in 2019, and in 2024 when Maduro blatantly just rigged the elections. But the civilian population is unarmed and afraid of the army and these gangs that are on Maduro's payroll. They're called colectivos. These are pro-government militants. They ride around on motorcycles with weapons, and everywhere there is apathy and fear. They show up and can do whatever they want without trial or investigation. Anything at all. So, if we're talking about a military operation, it's unlikely. Specifically, a ground operation like that is unlikely. Because this isn't a desert, it's jungle, it's Caracas, it's densely built up areas and so on. That would mean a huge number of casualties. It's unlikely to happen. By the way, one of the founders of Blackwater, a private military company, even started a fundraiser to eliminate the regime. And right away, theories emerged that maybe it would be something like this. An operation using PMCs, private military companies, to overthrow Maduro, but that's also unlikely. In other words, a full-scale invasion is extremely unlikely. Even though the fleet is stationed there and American bases are being reconstructed, an internal coup, that's the most realistic scenario, but also the most difficult. So, if a group of generals close to Maduro or part of the military elite decides that he has become just too toxic and they are approached by negotiators from the US offering them security guarantees, then it's possible. That is, if serious unrest begins, ordinary soldiers will most likely desert en masse or join the rebels. Because there the soldiers are with the people. They definitely won't die for Maduro. But they need to see some real force, because if the uprising fails, who will protect them from reprisals and the security services? From Maduro and from the collective. Who will that be? That's why they need to see strength. Well, that's basically how it is. For now, the pressure on Maduro continues. Leave. Leave while you still can, while you're healthy. Leave or you'll be in real trouble. And according to unconfirmed reports, Maduro has moved to the border with Brazil. In general, he's basically taken an entire country hostage too. Look at what he's turned it into. These colectivos ride around on mopeds. They deal in illegal substances. There are cartels, the military generals living large, living it up. 95% of the country's population is below the poverty line. And this Maduro, a ghoul, together with another ghoul, Hugo Chavez, ruined it. Once one of the richest countries in South America. In other words, this could have been a prosperous country. And here's another piece of news I couldn't ignore. It turns out that Putin's friends have started secret negotiations with the US about joint business projects in Russia. And since we're talking about Russia, Maduro, Putin won't openly help him. Yes, he supplied Russian air defense systems, they're there. But believe me, if something serious does happen, it won't make much of a difference. So it turns out that oligarchs close to Putin, Kovalchuk, Timchenko, and the Rotenberg brothers, have started confidential discussions with the US about future joint projects. In Russia, that's if the sanctions are lifted. Look, they probably wouldn't have started these discussions unless someone told them the war will end soon, we'll sort things out. That's why it's the era of traders, a time of complete lack of principles, a time when they're doing business with a maniac whose hands aren't just up to the elbows, but he's completely covered in blood, Putin several times over. And still they say, come on, it's nothing serious. Ukrainians are dying. You want to wipe out an entire nation, but let's talk about how we're going to do business. And I could understand if it were dictators discussing this among themselves, but they're discussing it with representatives of the United States. How is that acceptable? Here's what the Wall Street Journal writes. So first of all, they started discussing gas concessions in the Sea of Okhotsk and in 4 other areas. Putin's friends mentioned the extraction of rare earth metals near the nickel deposits of Norilsk, as well as in 6 undeveloped regions of Siberia. There you go, they've really gone all out. Also, Gentry Beach, a college friend of Donald Trump Jr. and a sponsor of his father Donald Trump's election campaign, entered into negotiations to buy almost 10% of the shares in the Arctic LNG project from Novatek, a company partially owned by Timchenko. Well, what can I say? Another topic was the revival of the Nord Stream gas pipeline, which is under European Union sanctions. According to sources, investor Stephen Lynch paid nearly $600,000 to a lobbyist close to Trump Jr., to McDowell for helping obtain a license from the US Treasury to purchase Nord Stream 2. The family, as they say, works tirelessly. But it's sad to watch when it's just about the money, like Scrooge McDuck. When I was a kid, remember DuckTales? They used to show it at night, and when those cartoons were on, all the kids were called home, everyone would shout the kids' names out the window, and the kids would rush home. Cartoons, cartoons. There was also Darkwing Duck. So it's just like Scrooge McDuck, I don't know, dollars, dollars, dollars. I wouldn't be surprised, I really wouldn't, if it turns out that some people are also swimming in gold doubloons, gold coins. So yes, the family is working at full throttle, and now we have another piece of news. Something strange is happening with Lukashenko. The Agroführer seems to have gone off the rails on starches in the palace, and things have gotten wild. Lithuania has detected an incredible number of weather balloons on its radars, which, I remind you, Lukashenko and his associates used to smuggle cigarettes across the border. They attach bags with cartons of cigarettes and send them over on weather balloons. God, Lukashenko, why are you stealing pocket change, going after small stuff? You could... By the way, Lukashenko recently... He got into trouble because Belarusian contraband was found in Chinese rail cars. So Chinese cargo is transported in transit through Belarus by rail, and it turns out that someone is suddenly packing something in there and they found it in Poland. There have been many such cases, people have talked about it. I think Lukashenko really got a scolding from Beijing, and fast. In short, Lukashenko is terrorizing Lithuania. They had to close the airport again. And now I think there will be more than 60 marks on the radars. He launched 60 probes. Where are you going? Maybe he's practicing to cross the border himself. He attached 60 weather probes to himself. I don't know. Basically, if nothing is done about this club of dictators, Lukashenko, Putin, Maduro, Kim Jong-un, the Ayatollah regime, if this group isn't broken up, so to speak, they will bring so much more evil to this world, believe me. But these are exactly the people others want to trade with. Instead of squashing these cockroaches with a slipper or spraying them with some kind of insecticide, people want to trade with them. Let's do business on the shelf, let's do Nord Stream, let's do this and that. And that means you will reap the whirlwind. The age of traders will reap the whirlwind. I hope cycles will change and politicians will come who understand the real threat posed by these senile dictators. And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's help our artillerymen. Aren't they just the coolest, huh? Come on, I'm asking you. Let me remind you, the link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video, and remember, donations for the artillerymen mean guaranteed destruction of all the filth that came to our land. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.